My husband lost his cool when the doctor remarked, "I had a second daughter." "A second daughter? You really are serious," he yelled. He assaulted me right out of the labor room. The personnel pushed him off right away and stopped him. Shaken but resolved was my attitude. I surprised him a week ago in a way he never imagined. Charlotte Harris here. For a while, I felt that my life was a dream come true. Although I grew up in a rural village, I went to Chicago aged 22 to pursue a marketing profession. I worked hard, ascended the ladder, and by the time I was 32, I had a strong job at a reputable company. When I met Ethan Harris, life looked ideal. Ethan was the type of man who can make you believe you were the only one in the room. He almost immediately swept me off my feet. Charming, confident, smart. He was a great real estate agent, and his drive matched mine. Not long after we fell in love and were married, it felt at the moment like the beginning of something exquisite. Our cooperation was flawless. I believed every word Ethan would jest about how we would be the Chicago power couple. Knowing I was pregnant appeared to help our love story to become better. I will always remember the expression Ethan showed when I informed him. He lighted up, whirling me around the house, and spoke about all the fantastic things we would do as parents. That was a wonderful occasion, and as my pregnancy went on, I hum on that optimism. 9 months later, our daughter, Lily, arrived. Ethan pounced on her. She was flawless. He was loving, focused, and constantly at my side. To myself, this is it. I had always desired this life. I found I was pregnant once more a year later, and the delight I had was unbounded. I saw Lily growing up with a sibling and our house bursting with love and fun. But during that second pregnancy, things changed. Ethan began working late many of the time. I originally thought he was merely striving to provide a better future for our expanding family, but his demeanor grew colder and more disconnected. He quit expressing interest in baby preparations or inquiring how I was feeling. I reminded myself he was under stress and tried to be patient. Still, I couldn't get rid of the biting sense that something was off. Emma's birth became the turning moment. The doctor saying, "It's a girl," and expecting Ethan to grin to rejoice with me, will always be with me. Rather, his face slumped. His comments seemed to me like a cut to the heart. "Are you positive? Is there no error?" Though I laughed tensely, believing he was kidding, his tone revealed otherwise, suggesting hatred. I grieved that evening as I cradled baby Emma in my arms, not because I wasn't joyful, but rather because I knew Ethan wasn't the guy I had imagined. From there, things just grew worse. Ethan became even colder and more agitated. Usually leaving me in tears, he would snap at the simplest things. The late-night feedings or aiding Lily and Emma didn't appeal to him. Though he was right there in the same house, I began to see a single parent. Though that dream was dashed one evening, I still hoped we would make things right. He smacked me after a little fight about something so small I can't even remember what it was. Rigorous. My ears rang, and for a split second I was too astonished to react. Ethan stared as startled as I did, but instead of apologizing, he bolted from the room, leaving me shaking and afraid. It was the instant I realized this was not only a passing phase. This was something darker, that which was dangerous. I told my best friend, Natalie Brooks. From college, Natalie and I had been close. She was the one person I knew I could rely on. I told her everything. Ethan's coldness, his disinterest in the children, and ultimately the smack. Natalie found much horror in this. "Charlotte, you don't have to live like this," she murmured as she took my hands. "You ought to leave before things grow worse." She said she would assist me, and that promise became the first gleam of hope I had seen in months. Encouraged by Natalie, I made contact with a nearby women's shelter. I feared what would happen if Ethan learned. Suppose he attempted to stop me, But I knew I could not stay, not for me, and most definitely not for my girls. I also got in touch with family law-oriented attorney Rebecca Carter. She sympathetically listened to my account and reassured me we could gather evidence to defend the girls and me. At that point, I didn't feel strong, but Rebecca gave me hope I may be. I vowed to myself as I lay awake at night, clutching Emma in one arm and listening to Lily's gentle breathing, I would fight for my girls no matter what it would take. They were deserving of better. We earned better. And I was determined to make sure we had it regardless of how difficult the path ahead may be. The days after that evening seemed as though I was walking on shattered glass. Every sound caused me to shuck. Every instant Ethan spent in the house seemed like a ticking bomb. Though deep down I knew it couldn't continue like this, I attempted to keep Lily and Emma as normal as possible. My daughters were entitled to a mother free of anxiety. Natalie came to be my lifeline. She visited frequently, acting as though it were merely a nice drop-by to prevent Ethan from questionable behavior. She was, behind the scenes, helping me get ready. She brought me in front of Rebecca Carter, the family attorney who would turn into my anchor. My hands shaking, I sat in Rebecca's office, describing everything, Ethan's coldness, his anger, and the smack. Rebecca only nodded. She did not interrupt, and she said something that turned things around after I was done. "Charlotte, you are not alone going to have to accomplish this. We'll see to it your daughters, and you are protected." That same day I spoke with a nearby women's shelter. Marcy, the organizer, a gentle woman, reassured me they could help with interim accommodation. She clarified that Ethan would not be able to locate us at the discreet and safe sanctuary. It scared me as well as giving me hope. Leaving went beyond simply stuffing a suitcase and heading off. It was about demolishing what I knew and confronting an unknown future. But I understood that was the only path. Like Rebecca suggested, I started keeping everything, every icy word, every rage, every bruise. I caught everything. When Ethan's temper erupted, I even videotaped some of our talks. If we went to court, I understood it would be very vital. It wasn't simple, though. Every time Ethan snapped, I had to behave as though it didn't hurt, as though I hadn't already been halfway out the door. Ethan arrived home remarkably early one evening. He entered looking stressed as I was in the kitchen cooking dinner. His voice low, he replied, "We need to talk." "Around what?" My heart thumping, I asked, facing him. He hesitated, then added, "We ought to pause. You, dear, the girls, myself too. Perhaps we should separate some time. You may spend some time staying with your folks." What I was hearing seemed almost unbelievable. He was attempting to drive me away, so presenting it as my decision seemed natural. I remained cool, though. I responded resolutely, "I'm not leaving my daughters." His expression clouded, and for a second I believed he could flare out once again. Rather, he simply said something under his breath and bolted. That was the instant I decided I had to stop waiting anymore. I packed a little suitcase for the girls and me, and the next morning he was at work. Natalie drove us to the shelter. As we left the house, I had an unusual mix of relief and anxiety. At last I was engaged in activity, but I had no clue what would follow. The shelter turned out not how I had anticipated. It was not some frigid institutional venue. It was kind, inviting. The other ladies present related similar tales, and for the first time I felt less isolated. Marcy helped me settle in. I recall her saying, "You're secure now, Charlotte. Go one day at a time." Safety did not, however, imply that the struggle was done. Rebecca and I labored nonstop on the legal matter. We compiled all the data I had and even got in touch with Mrs. Jenkins, my neighbor, who had heard Ethan screaming during one of his eruptions. She consented to testify, claiming she had always worried about Ethan's behavior. Naturally, Ethan did not simplify matters. Uninvited, he began showing up at the shelter, insisting to visit the girls and me. Marcy and the staff always sent him away, but his tenacity bothered me. He even tried to phone me, leaving voicemails full of apologies and pledges to change. Among them, one still bothers me. "You're wrecking our family, Charlotte. Come home, I will forgive you." Forgive me, as though I were the one separating our family. Rebecca informed me that this conduct would just help to support our argument. She replied, "He's showing his true colors," but it made no less horrific. When the court day arrived at last, I was a mess. Seeing Ethan seated there with his arrogant attitude as I entered the courtroom made everything in me stop before I turned around and fled. Then I considered Lily and Emma, their small hands clutching mine, their naive faces staring up at me. I was battling for them, not only for myself. Rebecca was astounding. She carefully laid out every element of Ethan's mistreatment and neglect in our case. She played the tapes, showed the pictures of my bruises, and phoned Mrs. Jenkins to testify. Rebecca didn't allow Ethan's attorney get away with painting me as unduly sensitive. She was unrelenting, and I much appreciated her fortitude. I felt like I could breathe after the court at last decided in my favor, giving Lily and Emma complete custody and forcing Ethan to pay child support. Ethan's expression at the reading of the decision seemed as though someone had knocked out his wind. I saw him vulnerable for the first time, and it was very liberating. Still, the fight was not finished. I still had to reconstruct my life, but for the first time in years I felt as though I could. Whispering to my girls as I left the courthouse that day, "We're free now," I said. "Mother's got you." And I meant it as well. That day leaving the courthouse seemed like the first step into a fresh life, yet leaving meant I would have to face terror. Ethan's shadow hovered over me, even with the decision in my favor. Still out there, he was still capable of cruelty and deception. Not yet. I couldn't allow my guard down. Returning to the shelter, I began to piece things together. Within a few weeks, I was able to get a modest 2-bedroom apartment in a more sedate area of the city after the personnel there linked me with options for housing. Though not much, it was ours. I had a location where Lily and Emma could simply be children free from Ethan's temper's weight for the first time in years. Getting used to life as a single mother was more difficult than I had thought. There were evenings when both daughters sobbed simultaneously and I felt inadequate. Packed with bills, I fretted about money all the time. Ethan had been told to pay child support, but he was not regular. Certain months the money arrived late or hardly at all. Rebecca reassured me we could pursue legal action should he refuse, but simply the thought of additional court battles tired me. Nevertheless, I persisted. I was able to stay with the daughters by finding a part-time marketing job allowing me to work from home. I reminded myself every time I felt overburdened why I had gone. I considered Lily's laughing, Emma's little fingers gripping mine, and the still times when I could at last breathe without anxiety. That kept me on the forward path. Natalie stayed right by my side through everything. She became my rock, not only a buddy. She dropped by following her hospital shifts, either with groceries or simply to sit with me while I ranted. She said something that really stayed with me one evening. "You're stronger than you think, Charlotte. Consider what you have already survived." She pointed out the proper thing. I would have survived, but surviving was insufficient. For my girls as much as for myself, I wanted to flourish. One of those protracted evenings of introspection turned up to reveal something startling. As I went over past financial records, I came onto records of accounts and assets Ethan had never disclosed. Though initially I assumed it was a mistake, the more I dug, the more obvious it became. Ethan had been stashing plenty of money. To perhaps keep me in the dark about his actual financial status, he had created accounts under his name and directed large sums of his income there during our marriage. Inside me, I simmered with wrath. All those years he had made me feel little, When he had turned away emotional or financial help, he had been sitting on a secret treasure. I was raging for Lily and Emma, not only for myself. Ethan had kept the money secret out of anger or selfishness, although it would have given them stability. I got right on calling Rebecca. She paid close attention and then remarked, "We can utilize this. He concealed assets, therefore breaching the conditions of your settlement agreement. It is criminal, not only immoral." We initiated a fresh legal process to get what Ethan had sought to keep under wraps. That was not simple. Ethan always rebelled, charging me of attempting to drain him dry. Still, the data was indisputable. Rebecca's knowledge helped us to expose the whole degree of his dishonesty. I had a feeling of justice I never would have imagined when the decision came down in my favor once more. That money turned all around. It was about giving my girls a better future, not about exact retribution. I saved aside college money for each of them and spent it to settle debt and furnish a stable house. I felt for the first time in years that I could breathe free from the weight of financial uncertainty smothering me. In middle of all this, an unexpected friendship started to bloom. My flat complex neighbor, Daniel Reed, had always been friendly to me. He taught, and he would often see me rushing after the girls or laboring to carry groceries. One evening he knocked on my door carrying a tray of cookies and said, "I thought you might need a little pick-me-up." Though it was a little deed, it meant the world to me. Daniel started to regularly show up in our life over time. He was just gentle, patient, and really sympathetic, not demanding or forceful. Emma and Lily loved him, and I started counting forward to visits. I initially felt the small stirrings of hope in my heart for the first time since Ethan. But I healed thanks not just for Daniel's compassion. Everyone around me, including Natalie, Rebecca, the ladies at the shelter, was helping. They all served to remind me that I wasn't by myself. I discovered as I started to reconstruct my life that I wanted to support people who had gone through what I had. I began helping at the shelter, telling women who felt imprisoned or hopeless my story. I told them about the anguish and the terror, as well as about the power I had discovered. I felt a little more entire every time I watched a woman's eyes sparkle with the awareness that she could fight back. Although my life wasn't ideal by then, it was mine, and for the first time in a long time I felt like I was advancing rather than merely existing. I had no idea, though, the most startling turnaround still lay ahead. I started to feel calm I hadn't felt in years as I started to reconstruct my life. Each of my daughters was doing great. Emma, now a toddler, was bursting with laughter and endless vitality, while Lily was adapting to school, meeting friends, and returning home with stories about her day. Every milestone they accomplished reminded me of the reason I had battled so fiercely to flee Ethan's shadow. Still, the trip was not done. One last twist had everything ready to be changed. It began with a normal conference with Rebecca to complete some documentation on Ethan's secret assets. She brought nearly cursory mention of Charlotte. There's one last issue we might want to investigate as we were wrapping up. Ethan's financial record points to some dubious links. One might want to investigate it. First, I hesitated. Though the idea stayed with me, I wanted to move forward, not delve further into Ethan's poisonous environment. What if learning more about his secrets may save my girls and myself down road? I thus gave Rebecca the all clear to look into more. I was shocked what she found. Ethan had participated in dishonest real estate transactions, altering records to raise property valuations, then pocketed the extra. The stories he had buried were part of his bigger plan to evade discovery, not only a means of protection from me. Rebecca clarified that this was criminal as opposed to just immoral behavior. Should we forward the material to the authorities, Ethan might be subject to major charges. I struggled momentarily on what to do. Part of me wanted to let everything go, to concentrate on the life I was creating with my girls, but another part of me, the one that had seen years of his lies, brutality, and manipulation, felt great responsibility. Now I was battling to make sure Ethan wouldn't harm anybody else the way he had done to me. I was not only defending myself, Rebecca helped me to forward the proof to the authorities. The probe that followed was rigorous, and soon it was evident that Ethan's offenses extended beyond what we had first believed. After his arrest, he was charged with many charges of embezzlement and fraud. I experienced a weird spectrum of feelings when I got the news: relief, vindication, and most importantly, closure. Ethan lost control of my life with his arrest. He worked for years to keep me imprisoned physically, emotionally, and financially. But these days the tables were reversed. He was paying for his deeds, and I was at last free to go ahead without anxiety. Life started to move to a different beat without Ethan in it. Daniel became even more significant in our life. Always honoring the speed I needed to recuperate, he never tried to hurry me into anything. His silence over time dissolved the barriers I had erected around my emotions. He turned to me one evening as we saw Lily and Emma playing in the park and said, "Charlotte, I care about you, about all of you. I don't want to overstep. Should a future whereby I might be in your life, I would be honored." I nodded and tears flooded my eyes. I felt safe, not only physically but also emotionally, for the first time in many years. Daniel wanted to be there to help my daughters and me as we rebuilt our new life. He was not attempting to repair or control me, and we did, beside each other. We built a loving and laughing-filled house. I did not end there, though. My encounters had set fire in me, a want to assist other women in breaking out from the cycle of violence and recovering their life. Speaking at gatherings and telling my tale, I hope to encourage others to muster the will to break away. Establishing a foundation aimed at helping survivors of domestic violence was one of the finest events of my life. Natalie and Rebecca helped us design initiatives to give women in need legal assistance, emotional support, and a place to stay. Every time I watched a lady leave our doors with hope in her eyes, I felt as though I was respecting the road I had traveled. When I look back, I still find great wonder at my distance. There were times when I felt I would never be able to flee, when I thought Ethan's violence had taken everything from me. Resilience, however, is about finding the will to rebuild, to flourish, and to convert suffering into purpose, not only about surviving. Growing up in a loving house surrounded by kind people, Lily and Emma are the biggest triumph of all, is they will never have to know the anxiety I used to experience. Though it wasn't easy, my path is evidence that justice and bravery can overcome treachery and hopelessness. One thing is also clear to me as I sit here today seeing my girls play in the sunlight. We are free, powerful, and at last home. My parents were standing in front of me, silent and motionless, as though they were awaiting an apology. When my mother did speak, it was in a tremulous, desperate voice. As she looked down, she remarked, "Thank you for coming all this way. We heard that you might be able to save our nearly insolvent factory. We are really appreciative." Even though he was unable to look me in the eye, my father spoke. It was shocking to discover that their own daughter, whom they had left behind in the frigid mountains, worked at the same factory that they were so desperately trying to save. "Let's talk about business," I remarked, attempting to maintain a calm tone. "Please lift your heads." They both looked up in surprise when they heard my voice. I had to chuckle since their faces were nearly comical. Together they said, "Lauren," their surprise evident. So my story started. How should I react to this circumstance? You can call me Lauren Compton. The only developed area in the little city where I live is close to the station. My neighborhood is primarily rural, with farms all around. In the past, my family manufactured and repaired farm tools at a modest smithy. However, we started manufacturing farm machinery parts back when my great-grandfather was alive and eventually constructed a larger factory. Our family gained a lot of local recognition. My mother, Cheryl, is the executive director of Compton Machinery, while my father, Logan, serves as president. Jerry, my older brother, has always been incredibly intelligent and my parents' pride. It's typical for parents in our rural community to have great hopes for their eldest son, and Jerry met those expectations by enrolling in a renowned high school. My brother received a lot of attention from my parents, but I was frequently overlooked. Daughters are viewed as individuals who will eventually leave the family in our conventional way of thinking. They were focused on my brother, who was supposed to take over the family business. Meanwhile, I was ignored and didn't really have any expectations. "You are female. When I was in middle school, my father told me rather frankly, you cannot inherit the family business. Once you finish high school, that's it." I knew where I belonged even at that young age. I chose to concentrate on my education. I had to keep going even if it was difficult for a middle schooler to set such a goal. My sole motivation was to keep moving forward. It was difficult to accept that my brother and I were related because we were so dissimilar. He was well respected and self-assured, much like the captain of a magnificent ship at school. However, I enjoyed being free and energetic, galloping around the countryside like a goat or a deer. Sports were the one thing I excelled at more than my brother. Even if I was more athletic, I had a difficult existence. I had to put in a lot of effort to study, and even then my grades didn't really improve, in contrast to my brother, who seemed to be born with talent. This difference was immediately apparent to my parents. Frequently, they made fun of me by saying things like, "You're no good. Jerry is not like you at all. Do you not recognize your boundaries?" Even though their remarks were extremely hurtful, I remained furious and upset rather than giving up. I was devastated one day when the results of our school's midterm exam were announced. I put in a lot of effort, yet my grades remained poor. Although my parents pushed, I didn't want anyone to see my report card. Upon examining it, they chuckled and remarked, "This was to be anticipated. Investing in you is no longer worthwhile. It's difficult to accept that you are Jerry's brother. There must be a problem." I silently longed for the time to stop as I sat there listening to my parents reprimand me. My brother intervened at that moment. He was always there for me, even if he struggled to communicate his emotions to our parents. "It might partly be my fault that our parents are so hard on you," he replied, "but I'm here for you always." His comments were like a comforting embrace, and I started crying uncontrollably. His encouragement gave me courage, and I believed that with him at my side, I could conquer any obstacle. I gradually got better in my schoolwork with his aid. My brother left home when I started my second year of middle school after passing the admission exam for a prominent city institution. The emptiness of his former chamber only served to intensify the harshness of the comparison to him. My brother, with his natural talents, seemed to succeed effortlessly, while I struggled in his shadow, still trying to find my own path. I enjoyed running far more than studying and joined the school's track team. Running had always been my passion, and I decided to chase my dream of becoming a long-distance runner. My goal was to get a recommendation from a prestigious school known for its relay team. While my brother was brilliant in academics, he wasn't good at sports. In this one area, I felt I was better than him, but even so, my parents didn't seem to care. They were only interested in his high grades, not the speed I could run. No matter how hard I worked, my efforts went unnoticed. My parents' attention and affection were always reserved for my brother, who continued to excel in his studies. When my brother turned 19, it was a big deal for my parents. They planned an extravagant celebration for his birthday. My mother even said, "Let's get him an expensive watch. If you can't afford to buy such a gift, don't even think about going to university." Her words stung, especially since I didn't have the money to give him anything fancy. As expected, when the day came, my family and relatives gathered at a well-known restaurant for a grand feast. Meanwhile, I was left at home as though I didn't belong there. My mother dismissed me, saying, Jerry deserves this because he's excellent. All you do is obsess over running. Being there would only make you feel worse." Her words hurt deeply. After they left, I sat alone at home and made myself instant noodles. As I poured hot water into the bowl, the steam rising reminded me of how empty and lonely I felt. Tears streamed down my face as sadness and frustration overwhelmed me. During that time, my brother returned home for summer break. He had graduated and started working at a top company, already carrying the responsibilities of an adult. He seemed more mature than ever. One day, he brought me a surprise. "This is an older model, but it's fast enough for browsing the internet. Give it a try. It might even help you with your studies," he said with a kind smile, handing me a laptop. Then he gave me a book and said, "Try using this too. I think you'll find it interesting." The book was a beginner's guide to programming. That moment marked the start of something new for me. It was my first step into the world of technology. Although I wasn't very good at math and science at first, I discovered that creating my own programs was surprisingly fun. I started using the laptop my brother gave me all the time. Every time one of my programs worked, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Slowly, I began to see a path I wanted to follow. It wasn't entirely clear yet, but the idea of a future in programming was starting to take shape in my mind. However, one day my dream was suddenly crushed by my father. "Are you playing on the computer again instead of studying?" he asked sharply. "I'm programming, not playing," I replied, trying to stay calm. "Don't lie. You're just gaming on that thing," he accused me angrily. Frustrated by his misunderstanding, I snapped back. "People with old-fashioned ideas like you don't understand how to use computers." That comment only made him angrier. "What nonsense are you talking about? Don't speak to me like that, Lauren," he shouted. Suddenly, he grabbed the laptop and, before I could stop him, threw it out the window. "Why would you do that?" I screamed, horrified. "You're still in high school and always playing games. Maybe now with that computer gone, you'll finally focus on your studies," he said, laughing as if he had done me a favor. I ran outside to where the laptop had landed. It was completely destroyed. The screen was shattered, the case was cracked, and it wouldn't turn on anymore. My heart sank as I picked up the broken pieces. The laptop, a precious gift from my brother, and the tool that had sparked my interest in programming, was now just junk. Without any money to repair it, I felt like my dream was slipping away. Standing there with the broken laptop in my hands, I was filled with despair. My brother's thoughtful gift, which had given me hope for the future, was gone. I didn't know how I could continue. The next morning, still weighed down by sadness, I walked to school. That's when a friend noticed my mood and made a suggestion that sparked a tiny bit of hope. "Why don't you use the school's computers? The teacher might let you," they said. I decided to ask, and to my relief, the teacher agreed. From then on, the school's computer room became my safe haven. After class, I'd head there, where a reliable desktop computer was waiting for me. It wasn't fancy or portable like my laptop, but it was sturdy and dependable. That computer became my foundation, giving me a way to keep learning and holding on to the dream I had almost lost. I started spending more and more time in the school computer room. On weekends, one of my teachers, who noticed how passionate I was, offered extra help. Programming became my focus throughout high school, and I worked hard to improve my skills little by little. During the summer of my sophomore year, my brother suggested I join a summer course in Chicago. I saved up for the travel expenses by working part-time jobs. I stayed in the dormitory of the company where my brother worked, dedicating my days to the course and spending my evenings learning from my brother and his unique friend, Brandon. "Brandon's a bit quirky, but he's not a bad guy," my brother said with a grin. "He's just not used to being around girls since he went to an all-boys school, so don't tease him too much." Brandon, pretending to look offended, replied, "What are you talking about? I've had plenty of interactions with girls." "Oh, really? When was that?" my brother teased. During the folk dance in elementary school," Brandon said, his face turning red. We couldn't help but burst into laughter at this innocent and funny moment. Brandon's honesty and quirks added a unique charm to that summer. That summer became a turning point for me. With the encouragement of my brother and Brandon's guidance, my love for programming grew even stronger. By the end of the summer, I felt like I had taken a big step into the world of programming, and it completely captivated me. Brandon was different from my brother. He was polite, refined, and carried himself like someone from a well-mannered family. Although he was a bit eccentric, there was no malice in him, and I found his personality oddly endearing. As I entered the summer of my final year in high school, something unexpected happened. My brother, who had apologized earlier for the destruction of my laptop, returned home during the break with a surprise. He handed me a used laptop and said with a mischievous smile, "This is from Brandon. He's pretty well off, so I asked him if he had any computers lying around, and he gave me this one. He wanted you to have it as a gift." "Why would he do that?" I asked, my face turning red. "I don't know," my brother teased. "Maybe he likes you." Stop saying nonsense," I protested. But my flustered reaction only made my brother laugh harder as he playfully tapped me on the head. That laptop became my lifeline. It wasn't just a computer. It was a symbol of the support I'd received from my brother and Brandon, and it pushed me to work even harder toward my dreams. My brother gave me plenty of advice, and my programming skills improved a lot. One day he said, "I never thought you'd get so into programming." "Yeah, it's really interesting," I replied. "Sometimes things don't work because of a small mistake in the calculations, but solving the problem is so exciting." Programming wasn't just a fun activity for me, it had become my passion. Seeing my own programs come to life was a joy that couldn't be described in words. Driven by this passion, I made a big decision. I decided to leave home, skip university, and take a job in the city at a tech company. With a new computer in hand, I felt ready to move forward and keep improving my programming skills. My journey had only just begun. One cold winter day, as I was preparing for my new life, my parents called me unexpectedly. Normally, their conversations weren't pleasant, so I wasn't hopeful. But this time, it was different. "Let's go on a family trip," my father suggested. Family trips were a distant memory from my childhood, so I was surprised. "Mine uncle won a hotel voucher in a lottery, and we decided to use it," he added. I felt a bit excited, especially since my brother would be joining us. On the day of the trip, we drove to a hotel in a snowy area with my father at the wheel. My parents seemed unusually cheerful during the drive, chatting mostly about my brother's job and my father's struggles with his factory. As usual, I was left out of the conversation. When we arrived, the hotel was much fancier than I had expected. We relaxed by the pool and enjoyed delicious meals together, but something about my parents' sudden kindness fell off. It didn't seem genuine. Late that night, I woke up to use the bathroom. On my way back, I overheard my parents talking in hushed voices from their room. "We can't keep spending money on her anymore," my mother said. "If we leave her behind, she'll understand," my father replied. "Yes, it's time for a big house cleaning," she agreed. I froze in place, my heart pounding. They were planning to abandon me. I felt like I was meant to be abandoned, and accepting it seemed like the only choice I had. With a heavy heart, I left home. The drive back was quiet, with hardly any conversation. Maybe everyone was just tired. I was supposed to be dropped off at the station and then head straight to the dormitory at my new job. Suddenly, my father spoke up. "I feel like having a coffee. Is there a vending machine nearby?" My brother answered, "There's a parking area up ahead. We can get coffee there." My father smiled, seeming unusually cheerful. "All right, let's stop there for a break," he said. Soon, we reached the parking area, and my father turned to me. "Lauren, go buy us some coffee." As expected, I got out of the car and walked to the vending machines. I chose hot coffee for my father and brother, tea for my mother, and grabbed a milk tea for myself. But as I turned to head back, I saw something that stopped me in my tracks. My father was unloading my suitcase from the car. "Well, this is goodbye," he said casually. "Driving you all the way to the station takes too much time and fuel." I stood there in shock. "Wait, isn't the station still far from here?" "You can figure it out, run or walk. You were on the track team, weren't you? You should have the energy," he said coldly. "Are you serious?" I asked, my voice trembling. "It's time you managed on your own." "All right, cleaning complete," he added. His words cut deep. "You really were just a piece of trash getting in the way." I looked at my brother, hoping for support, but he said nothing. Instead, he gently placed my cat on top of my suitcase. Standing in the snowy parking lot, I watched as the car drove away, disappearing into the distance. Tears blurred my vision, but somewhere in my heart, I realized this was the start of something new. My old life was over, but maybe, just maybe, this was the first step toward a fresh chapter. 15 years later, I returned to my hometown. A lot had changed. I was now thriving as a project leader at a successful company. The reason for my visit was work-related. There was a project at the local factory. Returning to this place stirred up a mix of excitement and old, painful memories. As the familiar factory came into view, I heard a voice that made my heart skip a beat. "Lauren." I turned to see my brother stepping out of a car, smiling and waving as he walked toward me. "I was worried you might get lost," my brother said. As we approached the factory, the scenery had changed a lot. "No worries," I replied. The GPS worked perfectly. Without missing a beat, he started talking about work, about the project. "The client has high expectations, so we need to be ready." I smirked playfully. "Let's see how long you can keep that energy." "Don't underestimate me," he shot back. "I've toughened up a lot in the city." "You've really grown stronger," he said, clearly impressed. "It's because I've been pushing myself," I replied. "You naturally get stronger when you work hard." This reunion wasn't just by chance. It was all because of this project. My brother, with his experience in a large corporation, had started his own company. Using his expertise in mechanical engineering, he created innovative products. His work had begun to catch attention in the market, offering hope to struggling businesses. Now, our hometown factory was in trouble, facing a serious financial crisis. That's why my brother had reached out to me, proposing a new project to help turn things around. "Let's get going," he said, and I nodded, gathering my thoughts as we headed toward the factory. As we opened the doors, a cold draft greeted us, carrying the faint scent of the past. It brought back a wave of memories, bittersweet and distant. This place wasn't just a factory, it was where I had grown up. The air felt like a quiet awakening, stirring emotions I hadn't felt in years. Then, as if on cue, the curtain of a long-forgotten play lifted. In front of us stood my parents, motionless, their expressions unreadable. "Thank you for coming all this way," my mother finally said, her voice low, her eyes looking down in desperation. "We heard you might be able to help our nearly bankrupt factory, and we're deeply grateful," my father added, still avoiding eye contact. "We truly appreciate it." "There's no need to be so formal," my brother said, his tone calm but firm. "No," my mother insisted. "We must show our sincerity to you, our important guests from Brandon Industries, all the way from Chicago." As they continued speaking, I decided to steer the conversation. "Let's focus on business matters," I said, keeping my tone professional. At the sound of my voice, they froze. Their bodies stiffened slightly, and they slowly raised their heads to look at me. That voice, "It's familiar," they murmured, their faces a mix of confusion and disbelief. Finally, recognition dawned. "You know it can't be. Lauren, is it really you?" I stood there, watching their shocked expressions, and couldn't help but smile slightly. Yes, it was me, Lauren. I couldn't help but laugh as they finally realized who I was. "Yes, it's me, Lauren," I said. "The one you left behind in the snowy mountains." They looked stunned. "How are you here? We were told someone from Brandon Industries would be coming." "Well, I'm the one they sent," I explained. "I'm a project leader at Brandon Industries. Brandon's father is the president. After you abandoned me, Brandon, who was a friend of Jerry, stepped in to help me. My brother had seen this coming and made arrangements to protect me." I paused, looking directly at them. "It wasn't easy, but I've built a life for myself. I've established a career, and I'm married now. My husband is a department head at Brandon Industries. The president personally assigned me to lead this factory's rejuvenation project. Do you understand now?" My parents stood frozen, and I continued. "At the time, my brother was furious with what you planned to do. Before that trip, he talked to Brandon and prepared for the worst. On the day it happened, my brother gave me a note that read, 'Our parents intend to leave you behind. If anything happens, call this number.' As expected, when it happened, I called the number. Brandon answered right away. He later admitted, a little embarrassed, that he'd taken paid leave in advance just in case I needed help. He came to pick me up immediately." I paused, the memories still vivid in my mind. When he arrived, I told him how heartbreaking it was to be abandoned like that. Tears rolled down my cheeks as I spoke. Brandon didn't say much. He just quietly loaded my luggage into his car and drove me away from that snowy place. I smiled softly. After that, I started working at a company in Chicago, which turned out to be a subsidiary of the company run by Brandon's father. With the support of both Brandon and my brother, I worked hard and studied at the same time. A year later, I enrolled in a night university, balancing work and education. After graduating, I transferred to the main company where I could use my specialized knowledge. I took on a role in construction management, and over time I built my career. Looking back, I added, as Brandon got promoted, I began working closely with him while leading a project under his direction. My respect for him gradually turned into love. Eventually, he proposed and we got married. I stood there, facing my parents, their shocked faces unable to hide their guilt. My journey had come full circle, and now I was the one offering them a lifeline. I kept working and got involved in a project that focused on bringing production back to local factories. Due to the strong currency and rising labor costs overseas, manufacturing abroad was becoming less profitable. Companies started looking for cost-effective and efficient options, leading to a renewed interest in domestic production. While searching for a new factory location to match these trends, I received unexpected news from my brother. Our family's factory was in serious financial trouble. The factory, which used to supply machine parts to large companies, had been lowering its prices to compete. But this strategy had pushed it into a corner financially. Taking this situation seriously, my brother and I decided to visit the factory together. When we arrived, my parents' attitude changed completely. Seeing me as a representative of Brandon Industries, they suddenly became confident. Now that Lauren is here, we have nothing to worry about, my father said. It's only natural for a daughter to help her family in tough times. I looked at them calmly and said, I think you might be misunderstanding something. I don't see you as my parents anymore. My relationship with this factory will only be business-related. Their expressions changed, and my mother snapped, How can you say such a thing? How can you be so heartless? I didn't raise you to be this way. Although they were angry, I remained composed. The current state of this factory is the result of your poor management. Because of this, we will be replacing the entire management team with staff from headquarters. In other words, your time here is over. My father's face turned red with frustration. You can't do that. The factory can be sold to pay off some of the debts. I can still manage it after that, right? I shook my head firmly. I cannot trust this factory's future to you. What do you plan to do about the remaining debts? This rescue effort is only happening because of Jerry's hard work. As for your lives going forward, that's your challenge to face. Good luck. My brother and I turned and walked away, leaving our parents sitting on the floor, powerless. Well, that's finally settled, my brother said. It's not really the end, I replied. It's just the beginning. This place will become a domestic production hub soon. With the production management system you developed and the new machine tools I've designed, my brother added, we can aim to be the best in the country, right? Not just the best in the country, I said, smiling. We're aiming to be the best in the world. Sharing a laugh, we both felt hopeful about the future. As expected, our parents sold the factory, but the money wasn't enough to cover all their debts. Even so, we were ready to rebuild from the ground up, fueled by a shared vision of success. I heard my parents are now working in a freezing place. They've asked us for money several times, but we've ignored them completely. Still, I couldn't just do nothing. So I decided to send them some disposable hand warmers I had collected during my college years. It was a small, ironic way of giving back, considering they once left me out in the cold. In the meantime, the factory we bought has undergone a whole makeover. It is presently flourishing and bursting with fresh life following restorations. Everything has been concentrated at the plant, including transportation, inventory control, and manufacturing. It has received a great deal of praise and produced jobs for the neighborhood. I've been collaborating with my spouse on new initiatives to grow our division even further. We intend to concentrate on establishing solid business alliances and assisting American enterprises in entering foreign markets in the future. Even though we lead hectic lives, we usually find time to visit that far-off hotel a few times a year. I get a pull in my heart every year when the snow begins to fall and I think about that parking lot. I ended up going back to the location this year. The question my spouse asked gently was, "What are you thinking about?" Reflecting on the past again. Yes, I said with a gentle smile. This place holds so many unforgettable memories. Me too, he said with a smile. It all started here. I chuckled. I recall that day. Your face was as red as a boiled octopus, despite the fact that it was midwinter. You're one to talk, he teasingly admitted. Your face was so red, you looked like a little kid. We exchanged glances before laughing out loud. I said, "Thank you, I love you," with a nice sensation in my heart. "No, thank you," he said, grinning. I compared life to a book composed of numerous stories. These kinds of moments make up the chapters of our relationship's history. Additionally, this chapter is among the most exquisite.